Hello everyone, Anfield here, and welcome to my Succession Ranger Reboot Guide. After completing my Succession Bible video only in August, PA soon hit us with the reboots on the global app and the confirmation that the Succession would be rebooted as well. So here we go again. The goal of this video is, like the previous videos, to go into great and comprehensive detail on the reboot of Succession Ranger. I've avoided rushing out of videos so that I could get more of an understanding and a handle on the changes to the class to make the guide as strong as possible. I have also recruited the help of Jayyy Games, a renowned NA Succ Ranger, to improve the guide further. Rilok was unable to get a PC unfortunately in time, but was still able to offer some words of wisdom on the reboot, and their content links will be in the description. Make sure you check those guys out. That being said, there are things in the Ranger community that we may not discover, like hidden cancels and things, until further down the line. But the vast majority of things we do know and understand, so we can definitely hit on those. Feel free to use the timestamps to skip to parts of the video that will be relevant to your needs, but as usual, we'll begin with the basics, so let's get started. To briefly cover combat from level 1 to level 56 before we get to Succession, you will essentially begin with Evasive Explosive Shot as your primary attack. Ranger is quite clunky for a while, but using A, S, or D and right mouse button will trigger EES, and then a follow-up left mouse button will add the umbrella attack of arrows, which is more than enough for early game PvE. This will require mana pots to sustain, however, so you should be aware of that. You could also learn to slide shoot into mobs, which costs nothing. This is holding W and then pressing the left mouse button, but only tapping it slightly and releasing it extremely quickly. If you do run out of mana, simply standing and pressing left mouse button on mobs will also restore your mana without the use of potions. At level 41 you gain Ultimate Evasive Shot. This allows many bow cancels to activate, however the only thing you could use offensively in PvE really is Will of the Wind. You can start with the basic input of A or D plus F. However, this is resource intensive for mana and stamina, so I wouldn't spam it. You can use Blasting Gust, but its damage really isn't worth it for killing monsters. Things pick up at level 46, so you can use Shotgun. This is a player nickname for a skill called Ultimate Charging Wind or Extreme Charging Wind. So to use this ability, I recommend kind of pairing it with Blasting Gust. Although it's not needed, I still think you can throw in the Q for Blasting Gust instead of just a W and left mouse button. So in that case, your input would be Q, W, left mouse button. This is especially true of forwards, not so much going backwards. So once you've got the hang of holding onto these buttons to basically use Blasting Gust as a sort of forwards mobility skill, you'll know when you're doing it right. Then I would add in Shotgun. So what you want to do basically is alternate in Shotgun blasts. So essentially you want to be going forward, so you don't have to worry about going backwards with Blasting Gust with this. So you want to have Q, W, left mouse button, and then add spacebar. So you could also, if you feel like it, you can release QW and left mouse button and add spacebar, but you don't have to do that. It just depends on how you like to feel and what's more natural to you. At level 54, you further improve Shotgun with Extreme Charging Wind. The inputs don't change. This will carry you to level 56 for your Awakening and your Succession quests. Moving on now to Succession PvE at level 56, I will show you my skill tree using limited skill points that I've gotten from my seasonal test ranger. You can see what I've chosen to invest in. If you have more points than me, you can also pick up Prime, Nature's Tremble, and Regeneration also. I also recommend yoinking a skill add-on for Charging Wind and also Descending Current. Although you don't need to go overboard with the rest of the add-ons just yet, these two are really nice. But for skills at Prime, you want to focus on is the first level of Descending Current, Charging Wind, and Blasting Gust. You will also pick up Flow Bypassing the Wind. You should also take the Succession buff Feathers of Spirit, which is activated through Shift E. You can continue to use Blasting Gust into Shotgun combo from before, but I recommend diversifying. Ironically, early game PvE is more complex at 56 than at 58 and onwards. Since Descending Current doesn't yet have Prime Ultimate Descending Current to go with it, you can still use Descending Current Prime and normal Ultimate at 56, but the damage isn't as impressive as it will be later. It sometimes will do the job, but it does get better. I actually recommend using Penetrating Wind and Charging Wind, which is now triggered by the new ability Bypassing Wind. This is where it gets a little bit more interesting, but you will definitely want to learn this stuff eventually anyway, so you might as well do it now. To do this cancel the easiest way, you can use Razor Wind. Even at level 1 investment, you just press E, followed by an immediate Shift, LMB, and RMB input, and that'll activate Penetrating Wind and Bypassing the Wind now. You can also add spacebar after this ability to use Shotgun, since Bypassing the Wind is Charging Wind and that is the pre-trigger for Shotgun. So if you want to add spacebar, it will trigger Shotgun. Another way to do this is with your round kick, which is harder to execute. To do this, you can use Blasting Gust, so Q, W, left mouse button, and you can then kick with F while the arrow is still flying, and then hit Shift L and B and R and B as your arrow from Blasting Gust lands on your target. This timing can be very tricky while learning, but it is satisfying once you do it, and it's very powerful, especially once you get Prime Penetrating Wind. Level 57 remains much the same as level 56, but you will want to grab Prime Penetrating Wind for its big damage. At 58 is when the grinding really becomes much easier, as you gain access to Prime Ultimate Descending Current and the next level of Prime Descending Current. Only the stronger mobs will actually survive this spammable onslaught. Put Descending Current on your hotbar and simply press the corresponding hotbar button and then left mouse button. That's it. If you need to go far between packs as Succ Ranger, the best movement is simply putting the bow away and sprinting. It's sad, but that's all it has. Pressing left mouse button from this will activate Blasting Gust, or if you press tab, you'll bring the bow out without using the skill. At level 59, you will throw out Ultimate Blasting Gust Prime into the mix, which is simply another hotbarable ability and left mouse button. It's very easy. At level 60, you'll want to grab Prime Extreme Charging Wind, the last version of Shotgun. This is the early PvE in a nutshell. Now, not until late game PvE will you really need to overly concern yourself with other things, as well of course PvP. So let's look at what a full skill tree for Succession would look like with things maxed out. So having a look at the skill tree here, it should be around 2,100 or so. Skill points. So you get this for free, but absolute bow skill you want to make sure you get. Moving shot, pinpoint, I lock. So Prime Razor Wind to the max. Absolute evasive shot. You want air explosion shot, evasive landing shot maxed, riding the wind, prime evasive explosion shot, twisting the wind, max charging wind, flow bypassing the wind, prime extreme charging wind, prime tearing arrow, Prime Blasting Gust, Prime Ultimate Blasting Gust, Absolute Will of the Wind, Prime Penetrating Wind, Prime Descending Current, and Prime Ultimate Descending Current. You know, you want your Succession E buff, which is Feathers of the Spirits, and then the 2 Awakening skills, Nature's Tremble, Regeneration. You don't really need any of the kicks. In fact, you don't even need what I have here, which is the Absolute Kick unlocked. I just have that for memes, but if you have enough skill points, go for it. Otherwise, leave it at 1. You can lock the others, though. You need to leave this unlocked, though. Then Call from Sky, max Call of the Earth. You're maxing all the passives for obvious reasons. And then for skill enhancements, what I prefer in PvP is Tearing Shot, Fury Arrow, Wind Explosion Shot. Squall Shot, though, is the best one for PvE, so make sure that you are PvEing, you have Squall Shot unlocked, not Tearing Shot. But if you're PvPing, you're much better off with Tearing Shot. I still prefer Fury Arrow over Roaring Arrow. That being said, I haven't tested Roaring Arrow. I don't think anything got rebooted about it, as far as I'm aware. So like no added protection or anything, so I think it's still the same. So I still think Fury Arrow is the better choice. It catches macro gaps on classes, which is more important than ever before. And then for this one's more complicated. So I used to really prefer Will of Descending Current, but recently I preferred Wind Explosion Shot. It's like sort of like an extra mobility protected skill. But it's not great, but it does slow when you hit people with it, so that's kind of cool. The problem with Will of Descending Current is the actual CC part of it is unprotected, the charge is protected, the forward guard, but the way that they've reworked the ability is really strange, and the skill seems to have very weird hitbox hitting, so I much prefer this, but we'll go over that later when we actually dive, sort of go deeper into the skills. This is just to give you an overview of the skill tree for unlocking things once you have a decent amount of skill points. So let's look at the skills again and break down what you can do with them. It's important to mention here that Ranger has gained back attacks in line with every other class in this game. And furthermore, we ditched our old punishing split damage in favor of the Wizard and Witch split, which means when heavy hitting groups of players, our damage is not as heavily punished. But anyway, starting at the top, we have Razor Wind. Razor Wind is a forward guard and outputs okay damage. I even use it to have the plus HP hit on add-on so that I can use its many hits in Node Wars when I'm hitting a bunch of base structures, and I just regenerate my HP if I need to. Razor Wind can also be used to flow into Penetrating Wind and Bypassing Wind, which you can do at any point during the skill by pressing Shift L and B and R and B. Since Bypassing Wind is a substitute for Charging Wind, you get all the benefits of Charging Wind, including its add-on. which is tier 3, without burning its actual cooldown. Prime Evasive Explosive Shot is simple enough. The ability is your only iframe. Activated from A, S, or D plus right mouse button, ES provides iframe twice on each hop. After that, it is unprotected. However, the amount of new abilities you can chain out of it now has been improved to continue your protection. Evasive Landing Shot, Riding the Wind, and Twisting the Wind are all unique and sometimes independent super armor mobility protections. The order you can chain these is not restricted that much, allowing you to get pretty creative with them. And while risks are still high with mobility, damage, and slow output some classes have, it's an improvement from before, and when used correctly, you can evade enemies long enough to get the gap you need where you can output damage. Interestingly, Evasive Landing Shot can be used under certain conditions to trigger Prime Tearing Arrow, a highly useful trait. To give an example, you can use Shotgun, activate Evasive Landing Shot with Shift R and B, and then when you land, press S and hold it, and then add E to use Prime Tearing Arrow. This skips the charging animation, and when you improve that by adding Shift L and B, R and B for Penetrating Wind and Bypassing Wind, that's a lot of damage. There's more, but we'll get there. I hope that by showing some demonstrations here, you can begin to piece together your own combinations of these skills. Charging Wind now has knockback when not fully charged, and knockdown when fully charged, while retaining the super armor while charging. The flow to move while holding it was removed so you can move with it charged, but it also does so in super armor. Just keep in mind that a fully charged Charging Wind will eat through your stamina very fast. The damage is respectable, and when caught unawares, an enemy can be hit hard with a knockdown, and then you can proceed to unload with them and reset still with Blasting Gust when needed. The cancels with Charging Wind was associated with were given to Bypassing Wind, which, while this removes down smash combo, that is more of an awakening problem, and the benefits for succession are quite large. So Shotgun, or Prime Extreme Charging Wind, has been given a forward guard on cooldown, which makes much more sense in the kit considering it's an ability you can cancel into from a lot of other abilities. Forward guard is also a nice block for some incoming damage as well as slows, especially for a mid-range ability. Prime Tearing Arrow continues to be serious damage. Although it was nerfed down a bit in the reboot, the ability to go straight into it again without charge means the potential is higher now, as well as the newly added down attack to the ability, and of course, Succ Ranger gaining back attack. It of course has the always useful 30% slow and its bleed, but also now comes with the super armor while charging and not shooting. Decently useful, but for the most part that won't really come in handy, but you can never say no to more protection on this spec, so we'll deal with it. Now let's get into Repeat Tearing Arrow. Where before Ranger's most renowned ability before was its Shotgun ability, at least to those less familiar with the class, now that throw may move to Tearing Arrow, which could be aptly named Machine Gun. Our first step to understand how to skip Tearing Arrow's first charge, there are a few ways to do this. I've already brought up one. One of the ways that's among my favorites is actually Regeneration. Regeneration is the only in-house attack speed buff in the kit aside from the Succession buff, and this attack speed is very useful, especially as it's one of the abilities you can insta-cast a charging Tearing Arrow from. You can use S and C to activate it, or you can use Regeneration from the hotbar, as you would in Awakening, and then you press S and E, as usual for Tearing Arrow. This skips the animation to charge, and you can begin shooting with left mouse button. When the skill nears its end, you want to use Penetrating Wind and Bypassing Wind with Shift L and B and R and B, and after releasing that, you can go straight into another charge Tearing Arrow again, simply by repeating the process over and over, so you press S and E again, etc. Next, we'll cover Blasting Gust. The improvement here is the forwards motion no longer requires the gimmicky kick animation to try and cover for speed. Pressing Q and W and left mouse button, then releasing the Q and holding the other two allows you to forward motion, and S and left mouse button allows for the back. You can still activate Shotgun by adding spacebar as we talked about in the early part of the guide. The damage is decent pressure, and if you're damaged or chasing or kiting, you want to watch your stamina, and Shotgun is perfect if someone gets close for the forward guard, the stamina break, the damage, and the new flows we talked about earlier, such as Evasive Landing Shot, although keep in mind that in some cases you may need to still EES for the iframe. Of course, you can use Blasting Gust sideways with A and D as well. Ultimate Blasting Gust is a wind-up nuke of sorts. We already covered it in the early game PvE. It's lost its knockdown, it keeps the super armor though, and it did regain down attack, so it's very nice for those relevant PvE spots where you can actually down attack mobs. But for PvP, there are always mostly better options. You can shotgun out of this ability as well for the forward guard and the distance initiation. Will of the Wind was improved to apply a higher minus range DP to your opponents now. This is great for PvE, but the ability won't find as much use in PvP. To activate it in a standard way, you simply use A or D plus F. To activate it in a more controlled sense, where you don't circle your opponent, you want to use Shift Q plus left mouse button and then rotate between A or D. I would start with inputting A and F before transitioning to those inputs though. This will avoid you triggering Twisting Wind on accident. Penetrating Wind is the single hardest hitting ability when counting for using it once. As you have already been instructed, it is often paired with Bypassing Wind, which allows you to trigger tier 3 and tier 2 add-ons while also doing big damage. Penetrating Wind even had some of its damage improved and given a stun, which is a surprising CC addition, but you can make use of it and it's good to know it's there. There isn't much to say about the Succ buff. It's Feathers of the Spirit. Use it constantly in PvE off cooldown, use it intelligently in PvP for a massive power boost. Nature's Tremble is an emergency forward guard, and in PvE is a decent DPS and minus DP debuff skill, especially when combined with Will of the Wind. On PC, you can mouse movement the ability to move its forward guard. We already talked about regeneration. The attack speed buff is nice, but since Tearing Arrow cancels from it, you might want to try and pair the two, which is amazing. It does have knockdown, but you won't often get to actually knock down a player with regeneration, but if you do, use a following up with Tearing Arrow, that's pretty lethal. Round Kick continues to serve to activate Penetrating Wind. It remains the same as my previous guide. If you wish to see it in more detail and how you do that cancel, you can simply go back and watch that. You don't need the flow Sharp Feather anymore though. If you do kick with F at the same time as you land an arrow ability, usually Blast and Gust, you can press Shift, L and B and R and B, you'll activate Penetrating Wind and Bypassing Wind, which we also talked about earlier in the guide. Call from Sky is much the same, a small movement, super armor jump. The ability, especially post Reboot, continues to serve little known purpose with the damage in the game. You can barely move, and you make yourself an easy grab target, you do no damage, and you apply no CC. However, you can try to use it to gain back attacks in PvE. Call of the Earth had its party buff removed from the early Global Lab reboot, and with it PA willingly or unwillingly kept the added cooldown to compensate for the party buff being added, so now you have to be careful when it's used. I'm not sure if this will get changed, but for the time being, choose your moments to use it carefully. When the action looks like it's going to kick off, apply the buff. A quick mention on Rage. Rage Absorb with a Z input used to be the go-to for having 100% Black Spirit Rage, however this was recently changed so that when you get the buff anyway when you use your 100% ability, which is Charging the Wind in this case. I recommend keeping it locked anyway so you don't accidentally use it in PvP, so you can keep the 100% ability when you're ready and then also gain the buff. In PvE though, I recommend locking it and not using it, as the 100% ability doesn't seem to do any meaningful damage in PvE and has a very long animation. I'd rather do a quicker absorb. For skill enhancements in PvE, you only need Squall Shot, which continues to have great damage in PvE. In PvP though, make sure you take Tearing Shot for the long range stun, slow, and bleed. For level 57, Fury Arrow continues to be more versatile for me. This rapid fire knockback fishes for CC better than anything else if you get into a peel position. It was improved as well, with knockback now being 0.7 CC rather than a full 1.0 CC. You can press Q when you achieve a knockback for Blast and Gust, and then it'll apply knockdown. For level 58, it's a bit more complex. Previously, I recommended Will of Descending Current, however, its mechanic has been changed, and personally I find it to be unreliable even with greater range. I still think it's viable, but I've actually been toying with Wind Explosion Shot for the protected mobility and the slow. So we're just going to take a look at some combos you can do after catching someone with EES. So a standard thing you might want to do is immediately use Regeneration after catching someone with a Stiffen. So that's obviously an option for you. You can also use a knockback CC, which would be from Tearing Arrow actually, from EES. Now, to do that is basically giving you a 1.4 CC count, so you can still reset a CC by knocking them down after that, so that's why he's done that. So we'll take this in slow motion here. You can see here the first one with Regeneration and that fast charging Tearing Arrow that we've already talked about. Very, very powerful. And then he just hits him with the Penetrating Wind into a shotgun. So you might do that, for example, if the enemy is very low geared, or simply because you want to get away from them rather than try to combo them because maybe they're getting back up. You can see here he's going in from a Stiffen into a knockback. That's 1.4 CC. Both are 0.7 CCs. And then, of course, using a knockdown to follow up with. So here again, we're going to see something different here. He's going to use Blasting Gust after the Stiffen, do some Will of the Wind for DPS as well as the minus range DP, and then use Regeneration for the knockdown. Then he's going full burst with the tearing arrow into a shotgun. We're going to look at charging wind. Jayyy likes to use charging wind actually uncharged. The reason for that is because it's less of a sitting duck and you just wants to release it fast to try and achieve a knockback. So if you do obviously not fully charge the skill, you do knockback instead of knockdown, which a fully charged one would do. So you can get a quick catch with a knockback. It's a very fast animation if you just quickly shift right mouse button. So that's what he's doing here, and that's what he's demonstrating. The 0.7 on knockbacks, like we already talked about, is very nice. So I've slowed it down here. You can see what he's doing. So you know, you have the knockdown after with Blasting Gust after he got the 0.7, so that's 1.7, and then you're allowed to CC again. I didn't actually remember to mention in the skill mechanics, but it is worth mentioning. The Descending Current got a bound on it now, so it does actually bound its opponents, which isn't as good as Knockdown, but it's still a pretty good CC to use. So obviously that's great in large scale PvP as well. So this is just basically demonstrations of that. You know, you can do lots of things there. He's using Blasting Gust to catch up to the opponent, so it does actually do an okay amount of chip damage, and then he gets the reset of another knockdown with Regeneration. Obviously, in that case, you have to be careful about the enemy's CC resistance, and because you put yourself right next to them, but assuming that they, you know, don't resist and Regeneration does achieve what it needs most to achieve, then you get it. And then, of course, with Regeneration, you could always use a fully charged Tearing Arrow. So next up, we're going to talk about bypassing the wind. Now, we've already talked a little bit about how this skill works, how it functions, and how it works with charging the wind. What Jayyy is going to show you here is how to use it to just use the buff. So it does have a plus 10% crit rate buff on it. It's not a skill add-on, it's a buff. So he's showing you how to essentially just quickly use it just to pop the buff. So usually we would use, you know, in the past we would use Regeneration plus Call of the Earth. Well, you know, Regeneration, obviously, you kind of want to save the cooldown for Tearing Arrow potentially, and of course, you have to be very careful with Call of the Earth. However, bypassing the wind has a much lower cooldown, and actually doesn't really matter if you are using the skill on cooldown when you're actually using Penetrating Wind, so you might as well always pop it just quickly just to pop that 10% crit rate buff. So it's kind of a nice little tip there. You can see how it's done on the screen here. So you definitely want that plus 10% crit rate. It's very, very nice. You don't have the equivalent of what Awakening has, which is Wailing Wind for the same thing. So you definitely want to see if you can continually pop that as a like permanently 10% crit rate buff. So our next clip from Jayyy is going to be taking a look at a large scale node war situation here, and you can see the use of the mobility here used correctly and in enough time. So the point of Jay's clip here is to show you two different examples. The first one is where it's successful, the second one where he lingers for far too long. Ranger just simply is not fast enough to linger, and that's something that will take time and practice, and even experienced rangers will get wrong because simply it is so hard sometimes to correctly predict when you need to leave, considering how fast classes are in this game. You cannot underestimate classes and their speed in this game. So you can see the first clip here is Jayyy doing it right, and then the second clip we're going to watch again how he notices that they're pushing too late, and you know, you just don't have the movement. You can see that he is using the movement there with 2 ES to iframe initially, but look how slow he is in comparison to the enemy's push. So as you can see here, we're going to look at Tearing Arrow. Tearing Arrow has a lot of different ways you can cancel into the ability now. It's one of the best things they've done for the kit in terms of adding some sort of diversity to your playstyle. So I really like that they've done this. It also adds a real threat to the Ranger bow, because before it was a little bit like, once you've done the big nukes, it's like, now that you can do Tearing Arrow again after the reboot, though, it's very, very powerful. So here I've slowed it down. You can see, again, Regeneration, we've talked about it. You can also see there using Bypassing the Wind to activate it by moving sideways. And then you can see again, after a Penetrating Wind hit from Razor Wind, Sharp Feather, well, not Sharp Feather anymore, but Kink canceling into, again, Penetrating Wind, Bypassing the Wind. There you're seeing Twisting the Wind, so ES as well. So you can see there's lots of little cancels here that he's showing you basically. Again, that's Evasive Landing Shot, an example of using it after that once again. So now I'm going to read you guys what Rilok sent me on Discord. Unfortunately, he wasn't, again, able to record anything since he doesn't have access to a PC yet. But he says, get comfortable with Evasive Landing Shot. Being able to flow into this upgraded skill from things like EES, Shotgun, Twisting Wind, and Riding the Wind drastically improves your protected mobility as Ranger, while also setting up for massive damage by following up with instant cast Penetrating Winds and Tearing Arrows. I personally find myself using shotgun into evasive landing shot or twisting the wind and riding the wind into evasive landing shot as my first means of escape, unlike ES. ELS seems a bit more reliable. Aside from that, everything else is pretty much the same. Positioning is everything, especially with all the mooses running around. Get comfortable with utilizing the minimap so you can preemptively get set up to escape out of a bad situation. So, good advice once again. Everything there is pretty much what we've already sort of demonstrated, what you've seen Jayyy do as well. So this is the kind of things that you guys want to practice when you're looking to play Succession Ranger in the rebooted era. I just want to thank Jayyy and Rilok once again for their contributions. It was massively helpful. I'm an Awakened Ranger mainly, so Succession isn't something I get as much practice in, so I want to thank these guys for their expertise. But let's move on to our final stage of this video, which is going to be PvE. Okay, so let's take a look at some PvE. Now, generally PvE, there's a number of different skills that you could cycle between, and it depends on how quickly you kill the mobs. I've recorded here in Bloody Monastery because it's one of the two big grind spots in Elvia, but of course you can apply these things to the lesser spots, and also depending on your gear, you'll just do more of the inputs, recycle tearing arrow more, and things like that. So it's important that you kind of get your pull right. So initially you might want to pull with Charging Wind, and again, depending on your gear, you will probably want to make sure you buff and debuff the mobs. By buff I mean yourself, obviously not the mobs. So to do that, I recommend that you use Charging Wind as your opener, so to do like a kick or Razor Wind into a kick. I don't use full Razor Wind anymore. You could do if you are struggling gear-wise. Feel free to use more Razor Wind as a full skill rather than a cancel into Penetrating Wind and Bypassing Wind. But Bypassing Wind, you want to proc that tier 3 add-on from Charging Wind with that ability. You also want to make sure that if you are debuffing the mobs, you're looking at basically using, aside from skill add-ons, you're using Will of the Wind for the minus range DP and then Nature's Tremble for the minus DP. They do stack on top of each other, so that's a lot of minus DP, and you want to use that early as your sort of opening. And then you might want to use a skill like, let's say, Twisting the Wind. You turn the camera, you can use Twisting the Wind to get through the mobs and get back attacks. And then what I generally would do is regeneration into Tearing Arrow. Of course, you can do regeneration, Tearing Arrow, and instead of repeat Tearing Arrow, you could then go into Squall Shot. If you need even more damage, you can use Ultimate Blasting Gust as well. So all these abilities you're just going to cycle through. You can pull with Descending Current for the initial damage, but make sure that you do kick, cancel, or E-cancel into Penetrating Wind and Bypassing the Wind afterwards. Essentially, PvE will become relatively simple for you, especially if you watch the mechanics section and have mastered the mechanics. After that, it's just cycling through what you think is the best for you, and we will go over add-ons a little bit, but essentially, yeah. So what we've been watching more recently is actually Ranger Succession with an Elvia weapon, and as you can see, the damage is just insane. The AoE is great, so just go ham. The scaling of Ranger Succession with an Elvia weapon is mind-boggling. It's so good, and the AoEs really work, and you can basically, a lot of times, you just run around Descending Current things like you would in early game grinding. The Elvia weapons are that broken, so something that is really nice. Part of Succession. I mean, it's nice in Awakening, but the AoEs are so much narrower in Awakening that it actually doesn't play out quite as well. So yeah, but that's pretty much my overview of endgame grinding. I can't really go into too much more detail to be quite frank with you. Ultimately, it just comes down to you sort of figuring out pack to pack what you prefer to open up with and stuff. A lot of it comes down to what your AP is and what the grind spot you're grinding at. For example, if you do grind here at Bloody Monastery, one of the things you do want to keep in mind is that you'll want human damage, and human damage crystals are also a good idea for PvE. It's difficult to duel for spot as a Succession Ranger, but it's not impossible. But I do recommend that if you really love Ranger, just tag an Awakened Ranger for that. You can get away with winning some fights though with Succession, especially if you master the new nobility. It just kind of depends on the class. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some add-ons here. I fundamentally believe that copy-pasting someone else's add-ons is a big mistake and that you should learn how to do add-ons. They're surprisingly much easier than most people seem to think. The amount of people to do ! add-ons in my Twitch chat is kind of remarkable. People don't like to think for themselves, and yet that would incredibly benefit them. But here are some add-ons. You can copy paste if you want, but keep in mind this is tailored to my playstyle, nor are they probably the best in slot add-ons you could have. There are plenty of different ways you could do this. You can see I have monster damage there 3 times. It's only really necessary twice, but I have it there just to make sure that I don't forget, because I'm a very lazy grinder. You know, depending on the spot, you might want down attack bonuses, you might want back attack bonuses, but the most core one I think for me is just to make sure that you have minus 20 DP on charging wind. If you pull with that, just build that you immediately lower the mob's DP, and then you can go into buffing yourself, because you probably still have some of the buffs that you have in other add-ons remaining from the previous pack you were just fighting, so that's why that's that way. There isn't much to say. Ultimately, there are only a few amounts of add-ons that you can even have in PvE. You know, the rest of them are only really PvP related, so you don't have a great deal of choice in terms of PvE. If you do grind, like I was earlier mentioning, Bloody Monastery for example, Abandoned Monastery, places like that, you want to have some human damage on top of the monster damage, because human damage will help you. Or I think it's PvP damage. Is it PvP human damage? Something like that. Whatever the add-on is called, that's what you want. And that'll help you at those kind of grind spots also. So moving on to PvP. PvP is a little bit more complicated, so I understand if you want any kind of help. Like always with add-ons, and what I always tell people, that if you want me to take a look at your add-ons, I will absolutely try to do my best to give you some pointers. What my own advice would be, taking a look at your add-ons. I do think copy-pasting someone else's add-ons is still a waste of time, but you could copy-paste these if you want. But again, this is tailored towards my playstyle. There's a lot of things in here you could definitely do differently. So try to think openly about what add-ons you might want and what would benefit you more. For example, let's look at Descending Current. I have plus accuracy and minus evasion on enemies. You might want double debuffs on those. The minus evasion really helps your allies when, you know, you're spreading that amongst a bunch of enemies. You could also do another, you know, like minus DP or something like that. There's all kinds of things you can do. You can even put a bleed on there if you wanted to. So please just try to think, you know, critically about it. Like, well, you know, what works for me best? You know, another example, Razor Wind. Like, if you go and copy paste that, you're going to get +4 evasion rate. For most of you, that's going to be completely pointless, since you don't have evasion, you have DR. So you might want plus DP instead of +4% evasion. I have evasion build because I'm a weirdo. So keep in mind these kind of things. So definitely, if you have any questions about add-ons, feel free to pop them in my Discord channel, or when I'm Twitch live streaming. I will always take my time to look at what you guys have for questions for Ranger. I love answering questions, but I do like people to have questions that they just don't want fed to them. They want answers that are critical thinking, because if you understand the kit, you understand the mechanics, you don't need someone else's add-ons. You can make your own add-ons, probably better than these ones. So, but this is, if you really want to copy paste, this is what you can copy paste. Although also another thing to keep in mind is I change my add-ons all the time, so you might want to keep that in mind. But yeah. So the only thing really left to mention is that I recommend that you go for a standard DR build with probably 1 or 2 accuracy accessories at endgame, and you will also want to probably throw in some RBF crystals in there. They are very helpful for Ranger. You can go full ham and put them in your chest as well instead of special evasion, but that's totally up to you. Everything else is pretty standard though for builds. But that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope that some of you found it helpful. If you did, please let me know in the comments section. Give the video a like, subscribe to the channel stuff. I like making Ranger guides. It's what I do. I make other videos about BDO as well, and sometimes other games, but also, I would also like to mention that please give a follow to Jayyy and to Rilok. Check out their content as well. I think Jayyy is more active on YouTube, but Rilok also does YouTube stuff, so give them a sub as well. I will be coming out with an Awaken guide. So far I'm in contact with Flannels and Swift for that, so it should be good, but Awakening is much more complex, and so it'll take longer for me to get that out. These videos are a gargantuan effort, and they take a lot of time, so I really do appreciate those of you that like the videos and, you know, comment and stuff. That really does mean a lot to me, and yeah, hopefully I see you guys next time.